In today's Gospel reading, brothers and sisters, our Lord presents to us a parable, a story. It's the parable about the talents. Talents are small coins which were used back then as currency. And he says in his parable that a master who had servants, as he was leaving, entrusted his talents to his servants. To one of the servants, and he says in the Gospel, each to their own ability. To one of the servants he gave 10 talents, to another 5, and to another 1. When the master left, the one who had 10 talents used those 10 talents to make another 10. The one who had 5 multiplied the 5, and the other who had 1 took it and buried it in the ground. When the master came back from his journey, the man who had the 10 talents went and told the master that he had used his talents to double the amount that was given to him. And the second likewise. When the master heard this, he was pleased, and he said to them, "Good and faithful servants. I have entrusted you over a little, but in return you will receive a lot. Enter into the joy or into the splendor of your master. Come into the master's home and rejoice." The one who had the 1 talent and that went and buried in the ground, went and gave him the talent back to him. And he said to him, "I know that you are a difficult master, harsh, and that so because of my fear, I was afraid of you, I buried the talent in the ground. But here it is, I return it to you." The master, hearing this, wasn't pleased, seeing the hard work that his other servants had done with his talent. He said, "If you knew that I was this way, why didn't you at least put it in the bank so that it could receive interest? But you have done nothing. Depart from me." So he sends him away. And finishing the parable, he says that it will be likewise for those who do not use their time wisely. They will be cast away where there will be the gnashing of teeth. Jesus gives us this image of the talents, the servants, and the master, so that we can understand in one way or another our purpose here on earth. We know that the master symbolizes God, a Trinitarian God who created us. We are his faithful servants, or we are his servants, since we were created by God, not to serve him, but because of our sinful state, we became servants and slaves of sin. But God, as we see in the parable, doesn't want us to be servants. He doesn't want us to be slaves of sin. And that's why with the other 2 faithful servants, he says, "Enter into the joy of your master. I have entrusted you with a little bit, but now you will receive a lot," meaning the kingdom of heaven. But what are the talents and what do they symbolize? The talents are the gifts that each and every one of us have. All of us, since we were born and we live, have a certain gift. And that gift is given to us by God, each according to their own ability. Hence why he doesn't give 10 talents to each of the servants. He entrusts to them whatever they can use, whatever there is in their ability to properly use wisely. And so, God in the same way gives us certain gifts. For someone, it may be the gift of charity. The other one may be the gift of a voice, of singing or of speaking. The other one might have the gift of compassion. The other one might have the gift of being silent and yet humble and be able to help others in that way. There are so many gifts that God has given each and every one of us, and all of them are different. To some, many, to some, few. And those gifts, brothers and sisters, many times are what we call an ancestral inheritance. So a lot of the times, who our parents were and who our parents' parents were have a lot to do with the gifts that we have. How many times in our life do we look at ourselves and think, I got that from my father. I got this from my mother. This is from my mother's personality, whether it be good or whether it be bad. Because just like we inherit the good gifts from our parents and from our ancestors, we are also inherited with a lot of the times their weaknesses, their sins and their faults when they haven't been properly repented for. And that's why for someone who's been entrusted with one talent or doesn't have many gifts will enter into the kingdom of heaven with that one gift that God has entrusted to them. Why? Because he understands that they do not have that ability to provide or produce more than that one or two things that they have. But if they do it in a good way and faithfully for the glory of God, that will be enough for them to enter the kingdom of heaven. But for someone else who has many gifts, who was raised in a certain way with knowledge, with morals, with a certain standard, who was taught the law of God, who knows about Christ and his church, that person has many gifts, and so then much is expected from that person. So the judgment will be different. Me as a priest, I as a priest will be judged very differently from you who are lay people. I have been given a certain responsibility, and that responsibility is not only for my soul, it's not only for the souls of my children which I have, but is the souls of each and every one of you, to look after them and make sure that you're on the right path so that you can come to the knowledge of the truth and be saved. But for many of you, you have less to worry about. You have to look after your own soul and the soul of your family, those who are around you, your spouse and your children, and help cultivate that. And so, on the day of judgment, our judgment will be different according to the gifts that we've been entrusted to by God. How do we use these gifts? Firstly, to recognize that these gifts are not ours, but they have been given to us by God. Everything which is good, everything which is virtuous, everything which has helped us in our salvation and to cultivate our soul and help those around us, we know has been given as a gift of God and not ourselves. You see, you don't see the other servants taking the 10 talents or the 5 and parading them around and saying to others, look how much money I have. That money is not yours. It's been entrusted to you by your master. And the same thing with our gifts. Our gifts are entrusted to us so that we can cultivate our soul and so that our soul can be prepared for the eternal kingdom of heaven. And using those gifts which have been entrusted to us, we also help the souls of others around us as well come to the knowledge of the truth and not to abuse those gifts. Many times we foolishly take those gifts, whether they be of knowledge or of wisdom, education, whether it be, as we said, of a good voice or being able to communicate well with others, or to be even someone who is able to help others in despair, able to cheer other people up. All of these are gifts. All of them are gifts. But many times, rather than using them, we abuse them. And rather than cultivating them as a gift from God for our soul, we cultivate them and abuse them so that we can expand our own ego, and so that we can glorify ourselves rather than glorify God who is in heaven. And so, that is the danger many times that we fall in. But I think the biggest danger that there is, and that I see many times around us, is the danger of the last servant, the one who was entrusted with 1 talent, 1 coin, and the one who buried his coin in the ground. And the danger is that of slothfulness, laziness. So taking what God has given us so that we can use it and so that we can cultivate ourselves, and rather than using it and cultivating our soul and expanding on our love for God and for others, we go and we bury our gifts, our talents in the ground. We become lazy, and rather than cultivating ourselves spiritually, we forget and we neglect everything. We neglect our prayer life. We neglect our fasting. We neglect our spiritual reading. We neglect our relationship with others. We neglect our own soul. We don't nurture our own soul. And so we spend hours and hours on end on things which profit us up to absolutely nothing, that are not profitable, on social media, on the internet, on television, on doing everything and anything else except helping and cultivating the gifts and the talents which have been entrusted to us by God. And then on the day of judgment, God will say to us, I gave you this, this, and this, so that you can be joyful, so that you can rejoice, so that you can enjoy your life, so that you can glorify God who is in heaven. And what did you do? You spent your time and you wasted everything. You buried your own talent. Why? Because you were too lazy, slothful, or even insecure about yourself so that you can use the gifts that I gave you. Because you trusted more in yourself than what you did with God. And that's the biggest problem that I think we face today as a society. How many times have we heard people say, trust in yourself, have faith in yourself, believe in yourself, all of these things about ourselves. And what does that do? It creates a society of self-centered people. Never in the Bible, never in the teachings of Christianity do we say, trust in yourself and have faith in yourself. Because when we do that, when we begin to do that, that is the moment that we will surely fail. Because trusting in ourselves means trusting in failure. Our trust, our hope, and our belief is in the strength of God and in the gifts that God has given us. And that for us is suffice to keep us going and walking the path of salvation, giving us the strength that we need to endure the difficulties, the temptations, the trials and the tribulations of this life, because they are. There are many of these trials and tribulations, especially when we make that conscious effort that we want to multiply the gifts that God has given us. That conscious effort to cultivate our soul and our spiritual life. The moment that we say we want to cultivate the gifts that God has given us is the moment that the devil intervenes. And he says, no, you don't. I don't want you to do that. I want you to be slothful. I want you to be lazy. I want you to have your spiritual eyes and ears closed so that you may not see or hear the truth. And this is where the devil finds our Achilles heel, our weak spot basically, the thing that we're most sensitive to, and he will use that against us. He will use that to fight against us. And that's why we never trust in ourselves and we trust in God. Because then at the same time, we know that when we are fought against by the enemy, by temptation, we run to God and we fall on our knees. And this is how we fight as soldiers, as Christian soldiers. As Christian soldiers, we fight on our knees, facing the icon of Christ and his most blessed mother. And we ask them for help. We ask them for strength. We turn our trust to them and we say, in you I put my hope and in you I put my trust. Because I know that I am a weak person. I know that I have believed in myself and all I have done is set myself up for failure. And that at that moment, when we turn to God in prayer in this way, that is when he comes and he gives us the strength, that he picks us up again to continue fighting the battle. And when we fight that battle, what are we doing? We are going through the furnace, through the fire, and we are purifying ourselves. You see, in order for gold to be purified, it needs to go through fire. And that fire is what purifies that gold and makes it shiny, and what shapes it in the way that the Master wants to shape it in. And he says, you were created not just to be flesh and blood, but you were created to be my image and likeness. You were created to be purified and to be shining like gold. And so that's why the psalmist says, you shall wash me and I will be made clean. You shall sprinkle me with hyssop and I will be made whiter than snow. All of these things, you shall do this. You will make me clean. You will make me white as snow. Not myself, but you, God, my Lord and Saviour. And when we learn to put our trust in him, and when we learn to use our spiritual armour, which is prayer, then we are purified and made strong through the grace of God. And then, through that grace, that's when we hear the blessed words which we heard in today's Gospel reading. Enter into the joy of your kingdom, of the kingdom of the Lord, of your Master, good and faithful servant. Amen.